Hi, welcome to another episode of the Arc of the Ohio podcast with Jen and Lindsey. Jen, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Lindsey. We both talked about how we both have a few kids at home today. So
Yep, it's absolute chaos.
Always. So yeah, really pumped to be here today. I've been kind of walking around with lots of energy early this morning, and my husband's like, "What's going on?" And I'm like, "I don't think you understand. Like, there are only like 10 people that I would be this excited about interviewing, and I get to interview one today. We're here with Nicole Jorwic. She is the Chief Campaigns and Advocacy officer at the Caring Across Generations, which is an amazing organization we'll talk all about. At her core, she's an advocate, from supporting her brother, Chris, who has autism, to live his best life, fighting so that all people with disabilities, aging adults, family caregivers, and direct care workers have access to all they need to succeed. As the oldest child of two oldest children, Nicole has watched her parents navigate not only her brother's care, but the support of her three aging grandparents as well, something that fuels her passion for a better system for everyone. Nicole is inspired by the light in people's eyes when they get it and buys into the push for an integrated and caring society. Nicole is curious to learn from people with different viewpoints and perspectives, an offshoot of growing up with lots of aunts, uncles, and cousins who have a wide range of political viewpoints and opinions and aren't shy to express them. In her spare time, Nicole loves to travel and experience new cultures. Nicole's an indoor cycling fanatic. Woohoo, me too. And has a soft spot for bad reality television to escape the stress of work. So I love that bio, Nicole. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much. That's an old one, but I like that one. I have to find it again.
Well, I liked it too because it kind of gives the whole spectrum. I love the people who get it, because as Lindsey and I live in that space all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I kind of I try to expand my community as much as possible, but I really feel comfortable with people who get it and understand
Mm-hmm.
my passion and what my life looks like having two kids with developmental disabilities. So, you know, you're a sister. Lindsey and I have kids with developmental disabilities, but you're the sister of uh, a young man, Chris, who has autism. So, how has your personal connection to the disability community helped you be a better advocate?
Yeah, it's honestly, I've been really lucky. I don't know why I'm emotional this morning. It's been a busy week, but in a good way, I think, because my work and my personal life do intersect so much, it can pull on emotions, but that's real and good, and that's how all of us are experiencing the world. And for me, what I like to say is that disability has really been part of the fabric of my life, and that actually happened before Chris was even born. I was in the first classroom that was included in my school district in the suburbs of Chicago a long time ago. And my mom was actually pregnant with my brother Chris at that time. So my friend Sam, who I still keep in touch with, has cerebral palsy, and he was in my classroom. And so to me, that was the quote unquote norm. My typical experience was having disability included in my day-to-day life. And then Chris ended up actually being one of the first students with autism included in the school district. And so because of that, and because of the way that I have seen Chris and his integration into our family, into our community, and the way that that has impacted everyone, from local businesses that cut his hair to my cousins who just like experience the world differently because they have that perspective. That's how it shows up for me. That's how it's always shown up for me. And that's why I started after I have been a direct care worker. I went to law school. I did special education law, working with families, and then got into the policy space when I was thinking that I wanted to have impact more change. And I thought not working on individual cases will be less emotional. Not true. But
It's always emotional.
yes, it is. It is. That seems to be the through line. And as someone who cries at Hallmark commercials, that's just the through line of me.
Same. I'm in the same boat with you. I cry very easily. So
Thank you. Thank you, Lindsey. But yeah, so
no.
that's how disability has shown up in my life and continues to.
Yeah, so we know you from your work at the ARC,
Mm-hmm.
National ARC. And so now you have this role at Caring Across Generations. So tell us about that organization and your advocacy work there, and who the leader, who the CEO is of the organization, just so people know?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so for folks that don't know, I was very proud to work at the Arc of the United States for almost 7 years. I started as Director of Rights Policy, ended as a Senior Executive Officer of State and federal work. And during my time at the ARC, I was really lucky to represent the ARC as principal in what started and what is now the Care Can't Wait table. The Care Can't Wait table formed in 2020 during the throes of the pandemic, where my current boss, our executive director, Ai-jen Poo, started bringing groups together that were working on HCBS, or home community-based services, or aging and disability care as we refer to it, and childcare and paid leave, to say, hey, we're always fighting for scraps, whether it's at the state level or at the federal level. Let's stop fighting each other and let's start fighting together to build power. So that was the end of 2020. We all worked together to get the American Rescue Plan Act passed. That was when I was still at the ARC, was really proud to ultimately get that passed with the help of so many chapters all over the country to get $37 billion, what all told, that got invested into the Medicaid home and community-based service system with that short-term investment. And then obviously kept working to try to get more. And during that time, Ai-jen Poo, our executive director, asked me if I would be interested to come and work at Caring Across Generations. So since November of 2021, I have been directing the advocacy work, which is both our federal and state work, the campaigns work, which includes the Care Can't Wait campaign, and includes the work that we do also with narrative change. We have a whole campaign around the fact that care is something that we all have in common. I also support our digital work, and just really get to oversee the programmatic work of our organization, which has really grown a lot in the last 3 years, including we just did a big Care Can't Wait bus tour. We've done a lot of work to keep the conversation going around care. And again, that very much home and community-based services is one of those pillars of care, along with good pay for direct care workers.
Yeah, I think I first learned about Ai-jen Poo from her book.
Age of Dignity, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Age of Dignity. It was huge. I think I heard her on Ezra Klein, or maybe someone was interviewing her on a podcast. And I was like, not only is the message just breathtaking, because it's like no one's ever talked about care like this before that I know, but the way she does it, with her confidence and just the way that she brings the facts, and I feel like we're always trying to be like, like you said, fighting for scraps and fighting on like, well, how are we going to do this in a bipartisan way? So we got to talk about work. We got to talk about taxes. We got to talk about things that are like easier for like everyone to understand. So we can never talk about care. Like we can't talk about women's work kind of stuff, because we're never going to get everybody on board with that. But then she actually broke that.
Yeah, I think, yeah. The thing that Ai-jen is really adept at, and that we've been able to really capture as a movement with Care Can't Wait, is yes, we center at the work that we do at Caring Across Generations. We are centering the folks that are most often left out of conversation. So Black and brown caregivers and disabled people, and people that are so often left out of the conversation. But the reality is that why we've been able to break through so quickly is because Ai-jen was really able to, and the leaders of Care Can't Wait were really able to see. So we released a paper, and this was again when I was still at the ARC, because I remember editing it with Bethany Lilly, who also used to be at the ARC. And we released that paper at the end of 2020, that the whole premise of it being that care is infrastructure. And that was at the time when we knew that infrastructure was going to be up for the conversation in the political world, because care is human infrastructure. And something that Ai-jen says is obviously that care work is work that makes all other work possible. And so that's true of unpaid caregivers and paid caregivers. And so that was a really key moment. And now what you've seen as we've been shifting, obviously there was a big infrastructure package past. That doesn't mean that the reality that human infrastructure isn't still true. But now what we're talking about is the care economy and the real economic impacts that have always been true, but we haven't done a great job of connecting them. And that is something that iGen is really, really adept and skilled at, is making those connections and making them seem really obvious and seem really clear, the path to addressing them really clear. And that's one of the many reasons I like working with her.
Yeah. I mean, Lindsey and I are really passionate about caregiver policy here in Ohio. We worked hard advocating for during the last Ohio budget, 2-year budget for direct support professionals to get a 38% increase here in Ohio. We're really proud of that, of the work that we did with the ARC and many other organizations. But we are still in a care crisis. As my individual work and Lindsey's with families, I'll tell you, that was a great bump, but it did not solve our care crisis. So what else can we advocate for at the state level to invest in care for people with disabilities?
Yeah, I mean, so as I said too, just like you were talking about being proud of the investment in Ohio, the investment that we were able to get at the federal level is something I'm really proud of, but it was only short term. And the reality is that because of decades, longer than I've actually been alive, of lack of investment in these programs, it is going to take more. And so, and that's because of that lack of investment, and also not investing in the right things, not investing in the things that people really want. We have polling from Caring Across Generations that shows that 95% of people with disabilities want to be living in their homes and communities. Well, that is 95% of dollars on long-term supports and services are not going to home and community-based services. So those two things have to even out. And in order to make that happen, we need to see the investment. And these are economically, home community-based services are cheaper services, but in order to rebalance the system to 95% to meet what people want, it's going to take that investment before you see the savings. And so what we need to make sure that we see at the state level, always continuing to push for additional state funding to put into the Medicaid program to address worker wages, address waiting lists, that type of thing. And then at the federal level, because we know that the reality of state budgets in every state is that it's not going to be able to be the bulk of the money coming from the state level to make up that 40+ year deficit. We need to see big federal legislation. We're working on it. There will be, obviously we do have an election coming up in November. Caring Across Generations is a 501(c)(3). So all I would say is just make sure that that's something that you're thinking about. We actually have a care voter guide, the Care Can't Wait National Coalition does, that includes questions you can ask. It does not say anything other than these are the types of issues that you should be looking at, and these are the types of questions you should be asking folks that are seeking to represent you, including their views on funding Medicaid, home and community-based services, and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, so I think pushing for investments in Medicaid at the state level, and then we'll definitely have lots of opportunities, I'm sure, from the ARC of the US and Caring Across Generations to engage in the federal push as well.
Yeah. I watched iGenPoo during the Senate banking hearing this week. It was kind of timely for our little interview here because I actually just ran across it on Instagram, and then I was like, I'm watching this whole thing because it was Elizabeth Warren interviewing, or she was leading on that committee, and she's a leader of that committee, or one of the leaders, I guess. And she basically they were talking a lot about tax policy, and I really encourage people to watch it just because when iGenPoo talks and there's another woman, I forget her last, Richardson, I think it's her last. You'll see
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, she's phenomenal too. And they both talked about these basic things, what we actually need for, the Care Can't Wait movement which is a huge movement, but like it's a huge movement and it's really exciting, but then she gives exactly the things, like specific things that are needed, like down to the percentage of what the tax reform should be, and making sure we don't continue the 2017 tax cuts because it was only giving money to the richest people. And I just felt like it was such a great statement and all the questions were great, but this is such a huge movement, And then, and from our level in Ohio, how do we convince like our little lawmakers here in Ohio, especially Ohio?
Hmm.
It's tough here. How do we
It's
convince
so
them
tough here.
to take it on?
So
So
tough here.
yeah, and so what I should have mentioned is actually what you did read in my bio is the absolute truth, which is that I have a wide variety of political views in my family, and a big chunk of my Republican family members live in Ohio, around the Akron area,
Nice.
and we talk a lot, and I am very blessed to have them in my life because I get to sharpen a lot of my my arguments, and
Hmm.
as we all should with everyone at the end of the day, we respect each other. And so it also helps because I have varying views, just like they have varying views, and I have and so everything should be shiftable. We all have that variability in our own space. And so what I would say, yes, so I didn't testify this week in the Senate Banking Committee hearing. I was really lucky to be there and to help with the development of the testimony. And ultimately, the underlying piece is that what I just talked about in my previous answer is that these investments are going to have big price tags. And the only way we're going to get to those investments is federal dollars. And we're not going to probably do that by putting new taxes on, but there's actually some taxes that are about to expire that if we just let them expire, it's going to leave a lot of money left to spend. And where should it go? Care. And the reason
Yes.
that is like, and so how you have these conversations is yes, inflation is bad, gas prices are high. These are realities that everybody's facing. It's true in my own life too. But also, what's more expensive? Childcare. What's more expensive if you don't have a Medicaid waiver and you have to pay out of pocket for a direct care worker? That's a lot more expensive. And so if the federal government can, instead of having those taxes that don't go to lower income folks, don't go to the middle income folks, but go to only the wealthiest 1% or even higher, then that means we can pay for those things without taking any more taxes out from those of us who are making less than $400,000. But again, in terms of like how you make those arguments to folks, it is about just bringing it to their own kitchen table, right? What are the conversations that are, my cousins in Ohio, what are they stressed out about in terms of it's definitely childcare costs. Those are definitely the types of things. I have my cousin, one of the cousins I'm talking about, and he'd be fine because him and I joke about starting a podcast, so he'd be okay with me talking about him, is that he sells Medicare Advantage plans. So he goes into people's homes and sees what they don't have access to in terms of long-term care. And so having those, so everybody has that experience. And so going there and saying, isn't that what we think that our dollars should be spent on? And there is a way to make that happen. And all it is by letting these tax cuts for wealthy folks expire, having corporations pay not even back to a really high percentage of 35%, but just an in between of 28%. And that means we can afford childcare. That means we can go from being one of the only developed countries that doesn't have a paid leave program to having a federal paid leave program, that also has incentives for small businesses and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the whole sandwich generation, I think Jen Poo said panini. I think she used the word panini at that banking hearing, which I thought was perfect because it's like you're not just a sandwich, you're actually being squeezed by what
Hmm.
and I'm part of that. My parents are part of that. My I just watched my grandma go through hospice care, but she got to stay home.
Mhm.
And our direct support professional that now is caring for my grandpa next, and my grandpa is now living with my parents.
Mhm.
Um, I can't tell people just how beautiful it is to have them stay home.
Mhm.
Because my great grandparents all had to go to nursing homes, and that was just what you did.
Mhm.
And now I'm gonna get emotional about this too, but it just makes such a huge difference to have them be in their environment. Just it felt so similar to the advocacy work that I do for people with disabilities while
Mhm.
I was, and my mom is going through this with my grandparents. Like my mom's like, now I understand why you're always fighting so hard for home and community-based care, because it does make a difference. But I will say it is really taxing on the caregivers in the
Mhm.
family. So if you're already a mom of a child with a disability like me and Lindsey, and you're usually the one nominated in your family to be the caregiver of the family. So like I already feel the weight and the pressure, when I left my legal career after working and practicing for about 7 or 8 years to take care of my kids. It was just a time where there was no way I could have kept, I went part-time for a little bit. I tried my best to stay in the workforce, but it just came to a point where, Jack couldn't go to daycare. Evie was having heart surgery. Like there were so many things going on that I left. And it took me 6 years to get back into the workforce. And it is so hard on families like mine. And then to know that in just a few years, I'll probably be taking care of my parents and my husband's parents and aunts and uncles and people that need care. And I want to give that care, you
Yeah.
know, and there's such great direct support professionals who want to do this as their job. But how do we create good policy for unpaid caregivers as well as the paid caregivers?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, it would be unfair and unrealistic to not acknowledge that caregiving is obviously a joy, but it is also a responsibility, and that comes with weight and sometimes, or not sometimes, very often difficulties. I've done some direct care in the last couple of years with my grandma who has Parkinson's, who broke her back, and I was the best solution. And so I always say that like sometimes we like created kind of like a care conga line between like me and my mom and other aunts and uncles, and everybody stepped in, but it doesn't have to be that way. And so to me, my first response to that question is the best way to support unpaid caregivers is to have a system that's not squeezing them by not existing, so that care can actually be a choice and not the only option. But the reality is that there is always going to be some level of care that family is going to want to and have to provide. And so there also should be, and I was just having some policy conversations with some of my disability colleagues this week around figuring out a way to look at more robust respite support. So as we're building the systems for more Medicaid services and even looking at Medicare and why Medicare isn't covering more home care services, and seeing if we can address that, because that's something that we know at Caring Across, 93% of Americans believe that long-term care is covered in Medicare, and it is not, outside of a very narrow benefit that's very underutilized for home health, or a short-term stay post hospital stay. And so I think that it's about making sure that we have those supports in place, and then also making sure though that you're pairing that with respite services. Respite services right now are grant programs, they're very limited. And also the underlying piece of all of it is the human infrastructure. You need to have direct care workers who are providing that care day to day, but also who can provide that respite support. I've been a respite worker, it's really fun work. And so it's also providing those supports and services. And also a big support for caregivers is making a system that isn't completely impossible to navigate. I mentioned the Care in Common narrative campaign, that's like kind of all of the work that we're doing in terms of narrative change this year is under that Care in Common umbrella. And it's based on research that we did last year to kind of figure out how people think about care and the language that makes the most sense. And that's spanned out of a conversation that Jen and I were having as I was driving home to drop off my dog so that I could fly to Florida to take care of my grandma, while I had just gotten off the phone with my brother's case manager about his in-home support program. And I said to Jen, I was like, I don't like, I'm a quote unquote national expert and I can't figure it out with my own family. And like, this is something we all have care in common. And we were like, oh, care in common. That's the reality. That frustration is what we have to try to like get to the root of, which is going to come through better policy, like those systems change efforts, but also things like respite and pieces that are directly for caregivers and paid family caregivers if they want to as well, obviously.
Yeah, I think there's so much untapped, like thinking about this because I feel like she opened my mind and you are too, like thinking about, like, because I feel the same way. I am helping people, so many people in Ohio. And then I'm like, but my own family, like if they saw like the the walking yard sale of our insanity sometimes. They'd be like, really, Jen, you should be the one like giving out advice and like telling people. But I think it's almost like we think it has to be this hard. Like if it's not hard, then we're just not doing something right or something. And it would be really great to have that robust respite care, because I think that's probably why I care so much about caregiver policy, because I see that when moms are struggling and dads, um, their kids just can't make progress and like and be in a successful situation, whether it's in school in the IEP meetings that I see, or when moms and dads are trying to get waivers for their kids. Like if mom and dad aren't okay, we're that child is just going to be in a bad spot, and there's really no other program that's going to really help them, especially with autism. I think Lindsey and I talk about this a lot. Like there's just still like such a misunderstanding about respite and caregivers when in terms of raising someone with autism, and then people with autism living in our communities. We can't just throw anybody in there. Like we can't just hire just anybody. And when I see families like saying, Jen, right now we're dealing with parents of minors in Ohio can be paid caregivers through some changes that were made in our laws in Ohio in January. They're having a hard time accessing that because they're like, well, there's some able and willing caregivers here, DSPs that can do this work. And the mom and dads are like, yeah, we've done that route. We've tried that. And we've gotten hurt by it in the past. It just didn't fit. And how can we kind of continue to advocate for families? A lot more mom and dads are making this choice, or aunts and uncles, and, trying to like make sure we actually have the right caregiving for the right people. And this goes with elder care too. That's why it's so smart to kind of join this all together, because you can't just pick anybody. They have to fit with the family.
Yeah. Well, definitely. And all of it takes skill. And I mean, and that's the realization, understanding, and respect of the direct care workforce as a professional workforce, not only obviously in pay, but also in the fact that it isn't easy. And I think that there's a lot of work to be done in that, in terms of training that's actually about person-centeredness, training that actually is about, obviously like being someone's supported employment job coach or something like that is a very specific skill set. And the wages are so low that you're not, even if you get good people, you lose them. I mean, that's what my family has experienced over and over. Like Chris's most consistent direct care workers for the last several decade have been people that either were related to, or he has known since like they were his transition school teacher in high school. And so that's just not a sustainable system for anybody. And that's because, yes, we need to make sure folks are trained, but it's really hard to get people to be motivated and trained in a job where you're going to top out at like $20 an hour for really difficult, taxing, and emotionally laborious work.
Yeah, we've been we use my mom as our respite, and she still has to work another job. And I would love nothing more than for her to be able to quit that job and be able to be our full-time respite when we need it. But because my son doesn't have a lot of add-on behavior, she's tapping out at, I think 17 has been her max. And that just doesn't seem worth it. Like that's what I got paid for my first nursing job, and then like built up. And I just,
Well, one thing I love that you said that like this should be a professional job, just like
it definitely should.
A teacher, a nurse, a doctor. And we have like taken those kind of like women's work jobs and like elevated a lot of those jobs. So like this should be elevated as well. But I feel like those jobs are elevated because they get like support, like pension type support, or insurance and things like that.
Right. Because think about, I'm the oldest of 16 cousins, right? Like we all talk about what the different jobs that they're going to do. They all love Chris. I've never once pointed them in the direction of being a direct care worker, because what's the path?
Right.
Outside of like during high school and college, and they've done it too.
Right.
But it's not, because I don't think it's a worthy profession. And so that's part of what we have to address to get there is like, as a society, you know, we should be elevating folks into positions where they're supporting people, disabled people, people with disabilities. Sorry, and we don't we use both types of language in Carrying Across. People with disabilities in their communities, older adults in their communities and in their homes. Like, that's the most, some of the most sacred work. And like, but that's not how it's treated, and it's certainly not how it's paid for. And so until we
Yeah.
address that, it's going to be difficult for any consistent support. And you're talking, Lindsey, about your mom. Like, that's a win-win situation if that those wages can be sustainable for her life. And then that's the right support for your family and your son right now. Like,
Yeah.
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 Yep.
And it's honestly like always us. So it's like,
Yeah.
I know so many moms and people that have someone with disability in their life, and then they're also caring for an or a direct support professional for someone else, or they're in a care type job, you know, or they're special education attorneys, because, you know, like that's the path that you take. But it's always like we're always counting on the same kind of group. So the policy is so important. And I'm just so thankful for you, Nicole. Thank you so much for being here with us. Tell us again, like, what carryingacrossgenerations.com, right? Is there anything else you can kind of point us to that people could kind of learn more about it or help advocate?
Yeah, so it's carryingacross .org. So Carrying Across Generations, was founded by Aijen Poo and co-founded with Sarita Gupta, who is now leads national programs at the Ford Foundation. And was founded to build a movement to change our care systems in this country, around policy change, organizing for those changes, and culture and narrative change. Some of that, what you were talking about, Jen, about not being able to realize something's different, or that there could be a different way. Some of the culture change work that we do, that really helps to open that space up. So those are the three kind of ways that we do the work. And so that we were founded a dozen years ago. You can get involved. We do have obviously our social media. It's like at Carrying Across GEN, but we also have a care fellowship program that we do. So if you join our list and follow us, you'll get the announcement when we're having a new cohort. But it's a great program where it's a month-long training where we go through the way that we approach changing the care systems and the care ecosystem of this country, and then make sure that we're having those folks that are caregivers, building those caregiving movements and that caregiving change in their communities. So those are some ways to get involved at Carrying Across Generations. And obviously, if you're in a state, I know obviously a lot of listeners are in Ohio, but we do a lot of different work in the States, and obviously we always will support other groups. So if there are groups, we do a lot of technical assistance with groups that are working around these issues in the States, because we want to make sure that we're elevating all of these issues at the state level and the national level.
Awesome. Thank you, Nicole Jorwic from Caring Across Generations. This is a movement and it's taken off. I'm not the only one that knows about it. Care can't wait. Hashtag. It's all over the place. You guys are doing a phenomenal job changing this narrative and the culture. And I'm just so pleased because I see like a great future for my family and all the things I support in my job. So
yes.
thank you
So much.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.